Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussion, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2022. And that brings us to a title which has been or had been introduced into the Criterion Collection current DVD and Blu-ray and now I suppose 4K UHD physical media catalog as an early DVD at spine number 96. And now we see it reemerge once again into the physical media catalog of the Criterion Collection, again at said spine number 96. This is the work from 1956. The name of the filmmaker is Douglas Sirk, and the name of the film is Written on the Wind. This is the work from 1956, and it is from the great, the one, the only Douglas Sirk, and it stars in its brilliant, impeccable, fantastic cast. People like Rock Hudson and Lauren Bacall and Robert Stack, and Dorothy Malone and others. Of course, I'm speaking about the highly charged, highly emotional, and so utterly entertaining work that is Written on the Wind. I think we can describe this work, Written on the Wind, in many ways. And I think a lot of those explorations are revealed in many of the supplements or many of the discussions that can be found in, say, the essay or the supplements that are part of this overall Criterion Collection release package. And we'll get to those later in the video. But one of those ways we can discuss it is, of course, in the context of the plot or story. And my goodness, what a plot this is. We have the setup of these various relationships having to do with the core characters. We have the context of this Texas oil family, very wealthy, very influential, the Hadleys. And there's the patriarch. There are also the two grown children, Kyle and Mary Lee, Robert Stack character and Dorothy Malone character, respectively. And also we have the introduction or the emergence or reemergence of other characters that are also close to the family. First, there is, of course, the Rock Hudson character, Mitch Wayne, who we understand is a close, lifelong friend of the Hadleys. His family and their family were close, or their fathers were close, we understand. And also, he was childhood friends with the siblings, and they have grown up together, and they are so close. Mitch and Kyle have a very intimate, close friendship bond. And of course, there's also the bond between the sister Mary Lee and Mitch Wayne. And that bond becomes one of the complex aspects of the plot as it develops through its various permutations that could be said to be entering into, wonderfully so, entering into the territory of drama and melodrama and highly charged soap opera to the nth degree. And that is also the case too in terms of the context of the relationship between Mitch and Kyle, after all, because another very important main character that is introduced into the setting of the story is the character of Lucy, who is portrayed with such brilliance and grace by Lauren Bacall. And here we have another great setup of type of relationship triangle or a romantic triangle of sorts, because we understand that there might be or there are or there could be certain feelings of yearning or longing or intimacy or romantic attraction that could be had between, say, Lucy and Mitch, or perhaps Lucy and Kyle. And how will that affect the relationship between Kyle and Mitch? How does that in turn affect the relationship between Mary Lee and Mitch? How does that affect the relationship between Mary Lee and Lucy? And how does that in turn affect the relationship between Kyle and Mary Lee within the structure of the Hadley family unit? And then when things escalate, my goodness, do they escalate. They really escalate in this cascade of entertaining twists and turns that, as I say, can be said or have been often described to be sitting very comfortably and quite proudly so, one can say, in this style or structure of the Hollywood melodrama romance mode that is also a source of great entertainment in terms of how the plot will turn this way and that. Like the title says, everything seems to be written on the wind, very much in the vein of that title. Things seem to be maybe going towards a certain type of conclusion, flying, if you will, through various strands of plot that seem to converge or collide in these explosive bursts of emotion and intensity. And so it is here, and it is so, as I say, highly charged and highly entertaining to this very day. But it is, of course, many, many things all at once. It could be said to be, in that context, a type of family melodrama. It could be said to be this wonderfully epic soap opera. It could also be said to be a story of romantic triangles or a series of unions or connections or also rejections and betrayals. The idea too of emerging feelings that are bubbling to the surface that might have been there from the very get-go since early childhood. Feelings of, say, insecurity about how one perceives one's own, say, worth in the context of maybe socially constructed concepts that are then adapted internally about, say, how certain male characters view their masculinity, for instance, as I say, in the context of the social mores of the time, as well as how that in turn affects their relationships with the other people around them. And I'm speaking, of course, of the relationship dynamic between Kyle and Mitch, maybe between Mitch and Kyle, and then Mitch and Mary Lee, and then also Mitch and Kyle and Lucy as well. And of course, Kyle and Lucy too, which is another key relationship as well. And that then too, I think, creates a lovely bridge or a lovely networking, if you will, of the many themes here. So we have the romantic, or the establishment of the romantic drama aspect of the film that is then linked so perfectly in a way to the exploration that this film engages in the type of journey of the psychology of the character, the psychologies of the characters, and the way in which the psychologies of the characters are explored, I think, are multifold. So, for example, we have, of course, the way in which they are expressing themselves, or the characters are expressed, how they interact with each other, how they collide with each other, how they struggle against each other, and how they form bonds between and among each other, and how those reactions or counter agents seem to be a direct result of their own inner psychologies, and which is also prevalent as the film progresses. So that's one way that we see the inner psychologies portrayed. It's directly in the drama itself, the direct plot points as they are revealed. And then also we have too the way that certain conventions of visuals and style and music also seem to be somehow creating a sense of further either augmenting or embellishing or otherwise echoing or paralleling, or in otherwise maybe in an interesting almost maybe literary way, for lack of a better phrase, it might be speaking to the certain plot machinations or the certain developments of the plot going forward. So to be more specific, this film has been said to be very stylized. It seems to be a film that is made from a certain perspective in terms of a tradition of presentation of this type of story in the mold of a Hollywood film. And because of that, it does employ certain aspects of the mold of the Hollywood film, including the engagement or the involvement of certain actors or performers that also are known to be associated with the making of Hollywood films, the Hollywood industry of this time. There are certain aspects of the decor and the setting, or the portrayal, or the lighting and the photography that also has this feeling of this type of storytelling or style. But we also understand that there's a sense of the artifice that is at play here. There's a type of what's described in one of the supplements as a type of alienation or distancing effect. And we'll get to that conversation when we get to the supplements discussion. But this is also, it could be said to be purposefully applied, because what this means is it allows for various possibilities of going along with certain expectations of the genre, or perhaps in another sense, going against type or going against expectation in terms of certain what otherwise might be certain conventions or certain traits of the genre. So, for example, maybe we see two top-billed stars that appear in terms of the marquee or the credits of Written on the Wind, and maybe that gives us the expectation of what might happen or transpire between the characters that they portray or throughout the course of the film. But perhaps we as viewers, as we are watching the film, are witness to the fact that those expectations might be delivered upon, or they might be totally maybe frustrated in a wonderfully surprising way, because the film and the filmmakers take us on a completely different and unexpected route, and that then taking us down maybe different avenues of expectation might lead us to further contemplations and further conclusions that we might make about the true nature of the engagement of these characters, which, as I was trying to indicate before, seems also to be based on their engagement between and among themselves is almost always, or always perhaps, based on a sense of their own sense of selves vis-a-vis the workings of their inner psychologies, and how the workings of those inner psychologies seem to be acting towards or counteracting against the world around them, and indeed the people around them. And so it all seems to be connected, and even in this world of seemingly beautiful and ornate and colorful and rich Hollywood artifice, that application of Hollywood artifice is applied to purposeful and brilliant effect, thus creating a sense of layer upon layer, a sense of a type of what we see is either giving us something that we expect, or maybe it'll provide us with a completely different expectation. And this is all, of course, setting the stage for a film that is also a story that is filled with characters that are quite intimately portrayed, but their reach and scope of emotion can be said also to be very much like very titanic, very much like we are watching a type of modern day American myth. And these are mythological figures in terms of the sweep and scope of, and the push and pull, indeed the sweep, like a violent wind, as it were, of the rush of emotions that can suddenly burst at any time. And so this is very much like the greatest, grandest melodrama or opera that is presented to us in this form of a truly compelling and entertaining work of art of cinema that is Written on the Wind. And so we have these grand emotions that are presented to us on these grand and lush and beautifully ornate Hollywood scaled up productions, while at the same time, going towards or going against those expectations, maybe giving us something that could be insular or interior, while giving us the grand exterior, giving us a story that has grand, lush levels, while also presenting the surprising corridors of inner psychologies that lurk beneath. And we have the presentation, the outward presentation of these wonderfully realized expressions of emotion that also might be mirroring or maybe even hiding what is lurking beneath. And so there is, I think, so much rich complexity that is presented in this landscape, and it is a joy to watch. It is a joy to hear in terms of the sweep and rush of the music, in terms of the way that the plot is also structured. There's an interesting way in terms of the chronology that we see immediately from the start of the film, and we see how chronology is treated in a quite a vivid way, and we also see contrasts of the violent sweep of what we see versus the beautiful rush of music that we hear over the opening credits. And so this also forms that idea of wonderfully constructed, almost a Hollywood confectionery sort of way, in a beautifully constructed way, the idea of artifice and truth and the contradiction that arises. And indeed, this type of contradiction is oh so apropos, is it not? Because we are dealing with a story that is about human drama, human emotions, and the sweep and ebb and flow of those emotions as they interact with other peoples. And indeed, this sets the stage for this wonderful, brilliantly paradoxical and poetically frustrating types of human situations and exchanges that are always about the human condition and the contradictions that lie beneath, or that lie inherent within those examinations of the human condition. And indeed, those human condition examinations are set forth in the story, the parallel stories, the various stories that are interlinking between and among these main characters, the Hadleys and Mary Lee and Kyle Hadley, and then Mitch and Lucy. So these four characters, the four main characters, are portrayed so brilliantly by this core group of actors: Ralph Hudson, Lauren Bacall, Robert Stack, and Dorothy Malone. This is the stuff of greatness. This is the stuff of sheer delightful entertainment to the max. And oh my goodness, what a film this is. This is, of course, the work which is Written on the Wind. The Criterion Collection has released this work, Written on the Wind, the Douglas Sirk work from 1956, on this new Blu-ray release. And this new Blu-ray release is purported to be based on a new 2K resolution transfer. And according to the materials that are included as part of this release, the transfer is presented in the aspect ratio of 1.85 to 1. In terms of a new digital transfer created in 2K resolution with monaural, uncompressed monaural soundtrack. And it reminds us too of the fact that yes, this was released earlier in the history of Criterion's DVD physical media catalog at spine number 96, which is what I have here. And I must say that I was always quite impressed with this DVD and its presentation. But that being said, I am quite impressed indeed with the way that this looks and it sounds. It feels like there is so much to be said about the way that color is used, and it seems like, and the sounds seem to be, sounds and music are also employed. And these are very key too when we understand, or when we are reminded of the fact that there's a lot that can be said and interpreted in how the artists, the creative voices here, are employing or using or relying on color schemes in terms not just of presenting the type of Hollywood-based storytelling, beautifully applied artifice, but also how that artifice is in fact perhaps not so artificial as one might think if one considers them to be a type of marker or representation in a type of coded way in terms of the use or application of colors to represent the various emotions or the emotional trajectories of the characters in a given scene or scenario of the film. And so that and those types of aspects, I think, are out in the open in a glorious, fantastic way when one watches the film, for instance, in a release like this, in the 2K resolution restoration version here. So I am very impressed indeed. So I'm very happy that this is released in this way. And I'm also happy too for a number of other reasons, and that includes what we get in terms of the supplements going forward. So now let us talk about the supplements that are included with Written on the Wind, the new Blu-ray. I should point out that the earlier DVD had maybe in terms of quantity, it didn't have a lot of supplements. It had a section which, for instance, was focusing in on the trailers for this and another Douglas Sirk work. And also it had a slideshow presentation style it was a written essay text that was presented in the slideshow presentation way that was focusing in on the career of Douglas Sirk, divided into various chapters in various chapters in a way that has often been employed to describe and discuss the various chapters of the filmography of Douglas Sirk, and it is a vast and fascinating one. And so I think the DVD and the supplements was great for that and for other reasons. The inclusion of that type of overview of Douglas Sirk's career in written form, the slideshow presentation form. Unfortunately, however, that slideshow presentation essay is, as far as I can tell, nowhere to be found on this new Blu-ray. So that's too bad because, as I say, I really enjoyed it. Now, I think it just reminds us too that those early release formatted supplements that had this slideshow presentation format are usually not included in new emerging re-releases of the same title. So that's probably the reason why it's just not part of the times, I suppose, in terms of modern day presentation of supplements. Although one day I do hope that maybe Criterion might think about including those sorts of supplements. I don't think it's a matter of space or anything in terms of, I think, with the technological advancements that have come in terms of compression and compression of data, etc. And I don't think it would be any type of going out of one's way to have had that particular written essay included as part of the supplements. I think it could have been a really great thing to have, but oh well, such is life, I suppose. But in any event, if one is interested in the earlier DVD, you are in for a treat for that very in-depth written overview of the filmography career of Douglas Sirk, which is not included, unfortunately, in the new Blu-ray. But speaking of the new Blu-ray, I should say, of course, too, when we focus in on the number of supplements, it could also be come to one's attention that on paper it might look like there are very few in terms of the number of supplements. And indeed, the number does suggest maybe relatively little in terms of the supplements, at least compared to, say, other releases from Criterion. For example, some of the other releases that have occurred earlier in 2022, for example. So in that way, maybe this release might seem somewhat disappointing to some. And if you feel that way, I can completely understand that particular perspective. I, for one, would have liked to have seen, of course, as many supplements as possible that might have dealt with maybe the life and career of Douglas Sirk, for example, for those who are being introduced to his world and his filmography for the first time. Or maybe the way in which this film is regarded in modern day critiques and academic circles and modern day audiences, etc., or other similar sorts of possibilities and discussions, or maybe a discussion from filmmakers who are fans of this work and the other works of Douglas Sirk, etc. I think there could have been many possibilities, and as well as the possibility of having some kind of version of as I say, the earlier slideshow presentation essay of the works of Douglas Sirk. So there could have been a lot of possibilities as far as what other things could have been included that weren't. And so if you feel that way, then that's no problem. I completely understand. But at the same time, I'd like also to look at what is included. And when we look at the content and quality of what is included, I think we can see that this is something that can provide a lot of possibility for exploration for this work and also other related works of Douglas Sirk. So the first of such supplements is something that actually has been seen or has emerged in other non-Criterion releases before this, but it's always good to have this just in case you haven't seen it yet. And it's called Acting for Douglas Sirk, and it's from 2008, approximately 23 minutes. And this is really great. Again, this is a wonderful type of maybe modern day take or recollection or looking back on the works of Douglas Sirk, specifically the works that are written on the wind and the Tarnished Angels. And so, for example, interviews or excerpts of interviews with Alison Anders, for example, but also people who were participants directly in the making of these particular works. For example, Dorothy Malone is featured, Robert Stack is featured, Rock Hudson is featured, Albert Zugsmith is featured, also Douglas Sirk himself is also featured. And so we hear from them themselves various takes and aspects and production history, anecdotes, and the like. There is a wonderful way that this documentary ends in terms of a lovely anecdote from Dorothy Malone, for example. So please check out this documentary if you can, for that and for other reasons. And they do speak about the way in which these actors were employed, and the roles were such, or designed in a way to such, in such a way that was relying on, in a very sly and a very clever way, their image, and perhaps their image directly, but also indirectly. And also that was leading to various possibilities of explorations of sensitivity and human nature, and also a type of innate, fundamental aspect of a type of representation or expression of feeling and emotion on a very gut level, an emotional gut level. And I think, for example, Robert Stack, when he speaks about, say, his experiences in certain scenes of Written on the Wind, for example, he does take the conversation in that direction. He also, the idea too of tragedy that these films seem to be evoking or suggesting or otherwise creating a type of American myth and thus American tragedy. And that American myth or American tragedy seems to be linked to a type of social consequence as well that can be finding its roots in sort of the portrayals of power and wealth, and a type of emotional, say, triumph or an emotional decay. And I think Douglas Sirk in particular speaks to, I think, really wonderful degree about these aspects and how this was part of his overall calculation in making these particular works. And we also talked to, we hear from Rock Hudson and the idea of their working relationship. Well, he mentions it, also Dorothy Malone mentions it, Robert Stack, etc. The way in which Douglas Sirk, working with Douglas Sirk on the set and seeing that engagement with a type of understanding, an inherent understanding of human emotion and drama. And also there is the idea too of interpretation of various characters. I think one of this film is famous for so many reasons. Of course, one of those reasons being the performances. For example, I mean, they're all standout, but one of those group of standout performances, of course, the standout performance of Dorothy Malone. And there are some details that are emerging here in this discussion about certain ways that her character is acting or is represented in some quite famous sequences that are included in the film that have to do, for instance, with the way that she is dancing to a particular piece of music that is also at a very critical moment in the film, by the way. So for these, and how it's linked to the way that other members of her family are reacting or are their current state of being at that particular moment in time, etc. So there are these ways in which this particular documentary does explore specific facets of the film Written on the Wind. So for that reason, I think it's so apropos and so relevant. And so it's great to have it included here. It also has, too, a discussion of another Douglas Sirk work, Tarnished Angels. And so if you haven't seen Tarnished Angels, then I would strongly suggest perhaps maybe skipping over that part or trying to watch Tarnished Angels, that film, first, because it does mention certain plot points of that film. And so if you haven't seen the film and you watch this documentary, you might get some very detailed or very specific points of plot that are emerging in the discussion. But that's okay if you've seen the film. And if you have, and if you haven't seen this documentary yet, then of course, I strongly recommend that you check out this documentary. There's a discussion too in the context of that film, as well as in the context of the earlier discussion of Written on the Wind, of the application of psychoanalysis in cinema, and to be even more specific, psychoanalysis in the hands of the cinema of Douglas Sirk, and the idea of failure, the complexity of failure, and the idea too of the emergence or depiction of what could be described as split personalities or multiple facets to a particular individual's character or psyche. And this is on display, I think, very vividly in these works, Tarnished Angels, and of course, Written on the Wind. And so these and other comments are what make this particular documentary so worthwhile. So be sure to have seen these two works if you can beforehand. If you haven't, then I think the documentary is divided in such a way that it does give you a title card when it's announcing when it's about to enter into discussion of Written on the Wind, and it has another title card when it's announcing when it's about to start a discussion on the work Tarnished Angels. So don't worry. So if you're able to catch it in time, maybe you can pause it and then go watch those works and then come back and finish the documentary, whatever suits you and your particular needs as a viewer of these Douglas Sirk works. In any event, if you are able to, and if the circumstances are appropriate, then please check out this documentary if you can. It is so worth it. That's not all, because the supplements continue with a 2021 one-on-one interview or discussion with Patricia White. This is approximately 20 minutes, and here she brings to the discussion her great expertise and knowledge regarding the works of Douglas Sirk and also this particular film, Written on the Wind. And her discussion points are so brilliantly expressed, and they lead to these fascinating areas of conversation. For example, she describes the work Written on the Wind in the context of family melodrama, also the idea of social criticism, which was hinted at in some of the earlier discussions, but here Patricia White speaks of it with regard to the Hadleys and the idea of the decay of the wealthy American family, and also how that also has maybe inherent to it notions of social decay as well as moral decay. There are also implicit in that discussion, or maybe parallel to that discussion, ideas or consequences of portrayals of wealth in American society, also portrayals of race and racial relations in American society, and that is also part of some of the story constructs of this work Written on the Wind. So for these and other reasons, Patricia White cites this work in the discussion of social criticism or social commentary in the 1950s. America, wealth, excess, and there's a type of how she describes it, a way in which this leads to a decay or poison of the moral center. And also this leads to that great contradiction of exterior and interior, the inner psychology and the outer artifice. And in the flow of this discussion, she brings up the gorgeous exterior and then the rot underneath. And I think that's a great juxtaposition that she raises. And it also, I think, coincides so nicely with the way in which one can view the works of Sirk in particular, Written on the Wind. And she expounds upon this and expands on this in other parts of this great discussion. She also talks about constructs of cinema or cinematic melodrama, and how part of the construct of melodrama is the way in which objects or things that are portrayed or shown in the film are used or meant to be used in a way, or meant to be representing in certain ways the ebb and flow of the emotional trajectories of the characters. And that, I think, is a very powerful and a key concept that she brings up, because it leads also to a very fascinating discussion where she links the tradition of Douglas Sirk to tradition of Brecht and theater. And she also talks about this in the context of the use of objects, the use of artifice, the use of things to portray or suggest emotions, and she links this to the idea of the effect of distancing or alienation for Fremdsen effect. And so this is, I think, a really fascinating connection, because what it allows for her to lead into in terms of her discussion is the discussion of Douglas Sirk's work, maybe in particular in the context of this period of his career, and also specifically, to take an example, Written on the Wind, the idea of artifice and product placement and things standing in for other things, taking that into the realm of the Hollywood melodrama. And with the idea of the Hollywood melodrama, we have the notion of stars and Hollywood actors, top billing, marquee credits, and how that leads to expectations, but how those expectations also are thwarted in fascinating and dramatically rich ways. And this also leads to her dissection in this brilliant way of the role and facets of melodrama in the hands of Sirk. Melodrama is meant to portray or suggest or otherwise elicit a sense of pleasure of experience, and also it is meant to elicit or suggest or express or portray the extent of the range of emotion of human interactions. And those emotions can be swift, those emotions can be intense, and yes, they can be violently rendered, and also lead to aspects of clashes of human drama that can also manifest themselves in, yes, aspects of clash and violence. And also, too, in the flow of human emotional expression, we have expressions of sexuality and sex in a very, I think, frank and vivid way. Maybe, for example, and quite memorably, perhaps, in the area, for example, of the story of the sister, the Dorothy Malone character, and various, as I say, famous sequences in the film involving music and dance numbers as a type of high intense rush of emotion and exaggerated spirit that can be described here in the discussion as being so heightened to be orgasmic, and how this leads Patricia White so brilliantly once again into another realm of the discussion, where we have here the nature of this film in the mid-1950s and the role of people like Douglas Sirk and also Albert Zugsmith and others in this period to try to present in cinema what might not have always been on full display in, say, a contemporary television program. And so in a film like Written on the Wind, maybe taking into consideration what are the other alternatives of entertainment that might have been available at the time, we have presentations of sex, we have presentations of alcoholism, we have presentations of impotence, nymphomania, in the words and descriptions of Patricia White. And so we really have this high intensity cocktail of cinematic entertainment that is presenting stories and concepts and themes that could be said to be of a maybe mature or adult nature that, as I say, would not have been seen perhaps elsewhere on, say, alternative television programming entertainment. And she brings into this, Patricia White does, she brings into this an example. She talks about the wonderful, almost artistically outrageous aspects of some of the sequences, like the Miami sequence and the decor and the setting and the color design, etc. And she also mentions a really fascinating turn of conversation involving artifice and the artifice of the coupling or the joining or the union of various characters as portrayed by the very famous actors that are portraying them. And the idea, too, of sexual imagery that is also dominating a number of the very significant and climactic moments of the film that are also in line, too, with the trajectory of the characters as we see them. Again, the core group of characters played by these extraordinary performers. So, for these and other reasons, my friend, the Patricia White discussion is really, really splendid. And she has this wonderful way of expressing these ideas that are very complex, but she expresses them in a way that's very easy to follow and has this nice flow of conversation. It goes in various routes and areas of discussion, and that can lead you to further areas of interest that you too can maybe explore if you are interested. So this is a great primer into the world of Douglas Sirk, an example using Written on the Wind in terms of his the way in which there is the richness of psychological complexity of a work like Written on the Wind and the works of Sirk, and the idea of cinematic melodrama and all that it has in terms of its cinematic and entertainment potential. So for these and other reasons, to the Patricia White discussion, approximately 20 minutes, this is fantastic. So please check this discussion out if you can. And then we round out the supplements with a trailer for the film, a period trailer. It's a very, again, rich and entertaining trailer, as they always are. So please check out the trailer if you are interested. And that, my friends, as I was indicating earlier, is the extent of the supplements. So in terms of quantity, it might be seeming to some to be somewhat lacking. I do encourage you to check them out all the same, because they are filled with a high degree of quality and discussion, and reveal a lot of the many complex facets of this work and other works by Sirk. And of course, from my vantage point, I would have loved to have seen more supplements that could have been included, especially some maybe carried over from other earlier releases. But be that as it may, what we do get is, based on the discussions that are made available, simply put, quite excellent indeed. So I encourage you very much to check out this release and the supplements if you are interested. Now let me speak to the wonderful cover art and design here, which is also replicated in the insert. I've taken the liberty of removing the insert in advance. And the insert, I should point out before I go any further, is one of these poster fold-out types. And while I am not really a fan of the poster fold-out type, I do admire it because of the repeating of this wonderful cover art. I should point out, in terms of the cover art itself, art director Sarah Habibi, Eric Skillman, cover illustration Sam Hadley. So well done for this. This is a really great cover art design, and artist Sam Hadley. It's great. It's a nice mirror too of the Hadleys as well, very key characters in the film. So in any event, yes, well done. And as I say, it's nice to see it repeated in this poster fold-out format. And so this is a really great work of art. I should point out too that we had the earlier DVD, and while I was perfectly okay with this particular DVD earlier release, I think this poster art or this cover art design really shines. So I'm very impressed. I love the detail of the font and the car, and the whole look and feel of the actual portraits of the characters themselves here. So well done, Criterion, for being able to include these this particular artistic rendition. And speaking of the poster fold-out, it does have the great essay. This is Blair McClendon's essay called No Good End. And so it's another in a long line of great essays in Criterion releases. And here we have a great discussion of the plot trajectory and certain themes. It has connections to myth and tragedy and literature. There's a lovely parallel that is drawn in the essay to, for example, Sophocles. And so for that and other reasons, and also drawing it back to the specific themes and core character subjects of the film, the character arcs, the context of Douglas Sirk's filmography overall, and other notable examples in that filmography, etc., etc. So, No Good End, another fantastic essay to check out if you can. I strongly suggest that you do it. It's really great. So, that's another great one. And so, with that, my friends, this is the release of Written on the Wind. Now, it might, as I say, it might not seem like it is packed to the brim with supplements, and if you do feel that way, that is okay. But I do also stress that a release like this, and indeed releases like other releases in the Criterion Collection, are ultimately about the film itself or about the films themselves. And when we're talking about this release and we're talking about the film in question, which is Written on the Wind, in this type of presentation, wow, wow, knock your socks off type of wow. And indeed, my socks were knocked off in a manner of speaking. And I say that with a great deal of sincerity and awe, and also a feeling of being thoroughly, thoroughly entertained by this great, spirited, and colorful and dramatic work that is so filled with entertainment, so filled with questions and thoughts and moments to ponder, as well as the great performances, and it all comes together under the command of Douglas Sirk. This is the work which is Written on the Wind. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.